It happened this past New Year's Eve when my girlfriend Emily and I were visiting her friend Clara in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Clara had invited us to a party at her apartment near Copacabana, and it was everything you'd expect from a Brazilian New Year's Eve celebration. Music, dancing, great food, and lots of drinks. Emily and I don't speak Portuguese, so we mostly stuck with Clara and her friends who could translate, but it was still an amazing experience. By the time we decided to leave, it was past 2 a.m. and we were both exhausted. Clara's apartment wasn't far from where we were staying, just a 15-minute walk or so. We'd planned to take an Uber, but the streets were packed and it was hard to get a ride. Emily suggested we just walk, and since the area seemed lively and safe with all the New Year's celebrations, I agreed. We headed out, weaving through crowds of people still partying in the streets. The atmosphere was loud and cheerful, with fireworks going off in the distance. I remember thinking it was the perfect way to start the year, just the two of us walking hand in hand, surrounded by life and energy. About halfway to our apartment, we passed a group of men standing near a food cart on the sidewalk. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them, clearly drunk, laughing and talking loudly. As we walked by, one of them said something to us in Portuguese. It sounded cheerful, so I assumed it was a greeting or a New Year's wish, but neither Emily nor I understood. We just smiled awkwardly and kept walking. That's when things changed. One of the men called out louder, and I called the words Feliz Ano Novo as he waved at us. When we didn't respond, his tone shifted. He said something else, short, sharp, and definitely not friendly. I felt Emily squeeze my hand tighter, and I knew she was nervous. We kept walking, trying to ignore them, but I could hear their voices getting louder behind us. Then footsteps. I glanced back and saw 3 of the guys following us, their expressions no longer cheerful. One of them shouted something again, but I didn't stop to figure out what. Instead, I whispered to Emily to keep moving and pick up the pace. The problem was, the streets weren't as crowded now that we'd moved away from the main party areas. It was quieter, darker, and we were suddenly very aware of how alone we were. The men were close in the distance, still shouting in Portuguese, and even though I couldn't understand their words, their tone made it clear they were angry. One of them yelled something that sounded like "Falta de respeito," and it clicked. They were mad because we hadn't responded to their greeting. I couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated over something so small. I turned back and tried to explain in English that we didn't understand, but it only seemed to make them angrier. At this point, Emily was practically dragging me down the street, her breathing quick and panicked. I wasn't sure what to do. The men weren't running after us, but they were close enough to make me feel concerned. I didn't want to provoke them further, but I also didn't want to stop and risk a confrontation. We finally reached our apartment building, a small 3-story place with a locked gate at the entrance. I fumbled with the keys while Emily kept glancing back, her voice shaking as she told me they were getting closer. My hands were trembling so badly it felt like an eternity before I got the gate open. We slipped inside and slammed it shut just as the men reached the other side. They stopped right in front of the gate, their faces twisted in frustration and anger. One of them grabbed the bars and rattled them, shouting something I couldn't make out. Another pulled out his phone and started filming us, laughing like it was all some kind of joke. Emily was on the verge of tears, and I felt completely helpless. I told her to go inside while I stayed near the gate, hoping they'd lose interest and leave. Instead, they just stood there, yelling and jeering, making gestures. One of them threw an empty beer can at the gate, and another reached into his pocket like he was grabbing something. That's when I decided we needed help. I pulled out my phone and called Clara, explaining what was happening as quickly as I could. She told me to hang up and call the police, which I did immediately. The operator didn't speak English, but thankfully Clara called back and talked to them for me. She told me the police were on their way, but it could take some time because of the holiday chaos. Meanwhile, the men outside were getting more aggressive. One of them climbed onto a nearby trash bin, trying to see over the gate, while another started kicking it. The whole gate shook with each kick, and I was terrified it might give away. Emily was sobbing by now. and I felt completely useless just standing there with no way to protect her. After what felt like forever, the sound of a siren cut through the air. The man froze, looking around nervously, and then bolted down the street before the police car even came into view. I can't describe the relief I felt when the officers arrived, but even then I was still shaken. We explained everything to the police with Clara's help over the phone. They said they'd patrol the area and advised us to stay inside for the rest of the night. Emily and I didn't sleep at all. We just sat in the living room holding each other, listening for any sounds outside. Looking back, the whole thing still feels surreal. It's terrifying how quickly a harmless situation can turn dangerous and how little control you have when things escalate like that. I keep thinking about what could have happened if we hadn't gotten inside in time or if the gate hadn't held. If there's one thing I learned, it's to trust your instincts and never take safety for granted, no matter how lively or safe a place might seem. And if you are ever traveling abroad, learn a few key phrases in the local language. It might just save you from a night like ours. I'm still trying to calm down after what happened last New Year's Eve, but I feel like writing it out might help. I wasn't planning to do anything exciting that night, just staying home to watch a movie and maybe pour myself a glass of wine. I've never been a big fan of crowded parties, and honestly, the idea of being in my cozy apartment while everyone else celebrated outside sounded perfect. The fireworks started around 8 p.m, even though midnight was hours away. I live in a neighborhood where people go all out for New Year's, so I wasn't surprised by the constant booming and cracking outside. It was loud, but nothing I couldn't handle. I remember texting my friend about how the fireworks were so intense it felt like a war zone. She laughed and sent me a picture of her party, and I told her I'd probably be asleep before the ball dropped. Around 10 p.m, I was halfway through a rom-com when I thought I heard a weird noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like something failing, but with all the noise outside I couldn't be sure. I brushed it off, thinking it might have been the neighbors or maybe the wind rattling something. A little while later, I got up to grab a drink and noticed it was colder than usual in the apartment. I checked the thermostat, but it was set to the usual temperature. That's when I saw the small window above my kitchen sink cracked open. It wasn't shattered, but there was a hole in the glass and the shards were scattered in the sink. My stomach dropped. I hadn't opened that window in weeks. I felt this weird mix of panic and confusion. At first, I tried to convince myself it was an accident. Maybe a stray firework or debris had hit it. But when I got closer, I noticed the glass was broken inward, like someone had forced their way in. I froze for a second, listening to the apartment. The fireworks outside were deafening, drowning out any small noises. My heart was pounding as I turned to grab my phone from the counter where I'd left it earlier. Except, it wasn't there. I started frantically searching, telling myself I must have left it somewhere else. I checked the couch, the coffee table, even under the cushions. Nothing. That's when the dread started creeping in. Someone was here. Someone had taken my phone. I don't know why, but I looked toward the hallway leading to my bedroom. That's when I saw a dark silhouette standing perfectly still, blended into the shadows. My brain couldn't process it at first. I just stood there, staring, hoping I was imagining things. But then the figure shifted slightly, and I knew it was real. I bolted for the light switch, my hands trembling so badly it took a couple tries to flip it. When the lights came on, I saw him. A man dressed in all black, wearing a ski mask. He didn't move, didn't say a word, just stood there, staring at me. His hands were empty, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out if he had something hidden. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. My front door was closer to him than it was to me, so I sprinted toward the back door instead. It led to a small patio that connected to the side yard. I don't even remember grabbing my keys, but somehow they were in my hand as I unlocked the door and I threw it open. The cold air hit me like a wall, but I didn't stop. I ran to my neighbor's house, an older man named Mr. Garcia, who had lived there for years. I pounded on his door, yelling his name, praying he was home. After what felt like forever, the porch light flicked on, and he opened the door looking confused and concerned. I blurted out what was happening, barely able to form coherent sentences. He told me to come inside and lock the door behind me. Mr. Garcia didn't have a cell phone, but he had an old landline, so he called the police for me. He grabbed a baseball bat from his closet and told me to stay put while he went to check outside. I begged him not to go, but he insisted. When the police arrived, they searched my apartment and found a man hiding in my bedroom closet. He was holding a knife. The officers said it looked like he'd been watching me for a while because they found a backpack with duct tape, a rope, and other creepy stuff inside. Apparently, he'd climbed up the fire escape and broken the window to get in. The thought of what could have happened if I hadn't seen him makes me sick. I keep replaying the moment I saw him standing there, silent and motionless, like he was waiting for the perfect opportunity. I can't shake the image of his mask or the way he didn't even flinch when I turned on the light. I stayed with Mr. Garcia for the rest of the night, and the police escorted me back to the apartment the next day. I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay there anymore. Even now, I jumped at every little noise and double-checked all my locks before going to bed. If I've learned anything from this, it is to trust your gut and take even the smallest signs seriously. I kept telling myself I was just imagining things, that there was no way something bad could happen in my safe little apartment. But I was wrong, and it almost cost me everything.